everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Veil Tarot and Astrology. My name is Candice Marie. Thanks for joining me. I'll be your astrologer today. Happy Thursday. Hope your guys' week is going well. Well, you guys get another grab bag episode from me. I'm kind of giving myself the creative freedom this week to do some stuff in between some of the major transits. I trust many of you guys are gearing up for the eclipse that's going to be coming here in just a few short days. If you guys haven't already checked out my video on the lunar eclipse in Taurus, please do check it out. I also touch on that during the monthly horoscopes. If you guys like my content, you want to see more of it, make sure you click the bell button below and you are subscribed so you're alerted as to when I have new videos coming out on my channel. We are here every Tuesday and Thursday doing astro musings. Sundays we are here doing astro weather, and Fridays we're doing live readings. We'll be here doing live readings on the channel. This will be Friday night. You can catch me here 5 o'clock p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be doing astrology. It's going to be real busy. So what I'm going to do is I will make sure that I post the link in the community tab. If you guys want to sign up and get your reading, make sure you check that out. All right, so on the creative freedom front, I'm titling this video of Monsters and Men. And no, I'm not referencing the Icelandic rock band, but more the inner struggle between fear and the unknown side, and the unknown inside of us, and the acceptance of what we may uncover. So in light of like Halloween and Scorpio season, I'm really making the use of the Mercury, Mars, and Scorpio. I actually have some of the astrological placements that we're experiencing right now, so I kind of feel like I'm playing with home field advantage. And I wanted to put this video out and talk to you guys about monsters. Now, I'm a huge Greek mythology buff. Like, it's my favorite thing. I could listen to that when I am cooking, cleaning, going to sleep at night, and that's like my jam. And today I wanted to do something a little bit different for you guys. I wanted to test drive a new format for a project that I've been playing around with. I've actually been sitting on this idea for the better part of the last 6 months, and I haven't really done anything with it, and I've been waiting for the right time to either put the project together or put together a small series. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, you know what, let's just test drive it for today's video. Essentially, the idea for this project is to create a series that is meant to guide you through a series of bedtime story inspired tales from Greek and Roman mythology. And it's meant to explore more intense and sometimes frightening aspects of these ancient stories. The goal is, as you're drifting off into sleep, we can listen to this podcast and discuss these myths and how they connect to current astrological transits, shedding a light on the hidden meaning of these themes that we can draw from them. But this is not your typical bedtime story podcast. I'm titling this for right now a working title, which is Astrology After Dark. It's designed for those of you guys who would like to explore the darker side of astrology and mythology and dive into taboo subjects like death, sex, power, and exploring the psychological and symbolic implications of these themes in the context of astrology and our modern world. So this is actually the first one that I put together. I've been working on it for a couple of months, and I figured let's give it a roll. So this is going to obviously be a little bit more visual than I'm intending for potentially this future project, but that's okay. So this particular episode for me, this is the first one that I put together. I was inspired through the mythology of the Hydra. So those of you guys who are not aware of what a Hydra is, in the context of mythological history or fantasy literature, this is the type of creature that's depicted as a multi-headed serpentine or like dragon-like monster. The most famous Hydra is from the Greek mythology described, in the myth connected to Hercules, where you see that there is this beast that has, severed heads, and it just keeps kind of growing back and coming back no matter how many you kind of cut off of the body. But in particular, the Hydra, this monster, is known for basically having multiple heads. It's portrayed as like a dragon. You can also see it as ranging from 3 or more heads. We've seen it in, I believe there's one in Harry Potter, but you see it all kind of throughout various forms of mythological text in many cultures. But essentially cutting the head off of one of them, you'll see more than one kind of grow in its place. So you see all these heads that start popping up. It's a serpent or dragon-like creature, and it has like long coiled bodies, and you typically see them associated or living nearby aquatic environments like swamps, rivers, oceans, and it's known to be poisonous. So some mythological texts suggest that it has poisonous breath. Some say that it has poisonous blood, but hydras are known to have poison, which can be deadly to anybody who encounters them. And they're also seen as regenerative because they're considered, to be really challenging opponents because they keep coming back. So overcoming the hydra usually involves strategies that prevent or hinder the regrowth of the heads. Now, this particular creature in literature comes up in the many myths of Hercules. Those of you guys who are familiar with Hercules and the battle, Hercules initially tried to cut off the Hydra's head using a sword, but for each head he severed, 2 more came back. Realizing that this was pointless, Hercules enlisted the help of Iolaus, who cauterized the neck stumps with fire, and as Hercules beheaded the creature, preventing the regrowth of the heads. Now, the head in itself of this monster is considered to be immortal. It's an immortal head, which makes the task even more challenging, and it eventually can only be killed by burying the head under a rock. So once you actually battle the monster, take it to the ground, you have to sever the last head and put it underground so it doesn't come back. Now, Hercules, when he beheaded the Hydra, all of this poisonous blood spilled out, and he took his arrows and he dipped his arrows in the venomous blood, which gave them deadly or poisonous properties. So that's interesting. So the poison could also be the remedy. And then Hercules managed to defeat the Hydra, like I said, by cutting off the heads and the regrowth and then finally burying it. And with this creature finally, put to rest, the second of his 12 labors was complete. So if you guys have followed the story of Hercules, you know that there is a series of trials that he had to go through. This was known as an example of the hero's trials and the cunning ways in which he overcame the insurmountable obstacles throughout his quest. This myth also serves as an idea that's about confronting the challenges that often lead to unexpected consequences, as cutting off one problem and then another problem emerges, right? So it's like this never-ending, almost kind of like terrifying thing that just keeps coming at you no matter what you do. Anyway, so why am I talking to you guys about a mythological Greek monster? Well, because in many ways, in today's discussion and the various charts that we're going to be taking a look at and these particular people out in the world is very much interconnected. So the more that I started thinking about, these connections and, their involvement with one another, their entanglement, reminds me a lot of like this octopus with like all of these like tentacles. All of them are connected to a bigger monster in itself. And some might consider a lot of this information today something that's a bit over the top, maybe a little conspiracy-esque, but nevertheless, I figured why not. In honor of Scorpio season and Halloween, I figured I'd tackle a few charts of the monsters that walk among us. Those who have no need for masks or costumes, their tricks prove not to be treats, but an overall threat to humanity. And overall, my belief is that the Hydra in itself is actually the globalist agenda. So what are my top scariest charts that we're going to be discussing today? Well, we're going to take a look at good old Bill Gates. We've got his birthday coming up here pretty soon, and he will be having an eclipse on his birthday. We're going to take a look at the chart and kind of see how that is potentially connected to this web. Followed by Klaus Schwab. We're going to take a look at the World Economic Forum's leaders chart. We do have a rectification on that chart, so we don't have the exact time, but we'll be diving deep into that and looking at some of the themes with his. Followed by a quick peek at the United Nations and the World Health Organization. If you guys have not already given me a thumbs up, please give me a thumbs up for this content. I really appreciate it because this is probably going to be one that's going to get me in some trouble. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the first chart that I have here. That's going to be for Bill Gates. Just to keep everything neutral so you're not getting anything outside of just the bare bones of what's on the internet, I have included in quotes the pretty much the general overall, I guess, like background of some of these individuals. So it's not my words. This is going to be directly off the internet, followed by me taking a look at the chart, talking to you a little bit about this chart, and then I'm going to give you some background and some stuff that I've picked up. All right, so we're going to take a look at Bill's chart. We've got him here October 28th, 1955 at 9:10 p.m. in Seattle, Washington. That's going to give him a Scorpio sun, a Cancer rising, and an Aries moon. As an honorary Sun and Scorpio Aries moon, not thrilled to be represented by Mr. Gates, but you know, it is what it is. I'll see if I can make up for that. All right, so a couple things that I noticed in regards to his astrology that's pretty prominent. One is the fact that we're getting ready to actually see an eclipse that's going to be taking place on his birthday. Now we've got the Sun in Scorpio hanging out here, and this is technically in the equal or Placidus fourth house. Fourth house being the roots, the past, family, home, and private life. So the sun shining a light there seems to indicate that a lot of his focus on life is going to be things revolving around either his home country, his family, properties, privacy. That's what we really see with like Scorpio. And when the eclipse comes in, it's going to be exactly in opposition to his sun. So let me show you guys what this is going to look like. All right, so this will be on the 28th, and the eclipse is going to be at 5 degrees, lunar degrees of lunar eclipse in Taurus, direct opposition to his sun. So he's got a full moon on his birthday, which means big things happening in this next year, big awareness, big completion. And we are going to be having this in conjunction to Jupiter, which rules his 9th house of foreign affairs, education, travel, law, legality, and teaching. In general, right, this eclipse is so impactful because it's going to be in conjunction to Jupiter, but the eclipse in itself is almost illuminating through the opposition with the sun, the conjunction to Jupiter, which makes things bigger. It can bring more resources, it can bring more abundance, but it also has a tendency to show where there's big emotions. And the eclipse in itself, or the moon, talks about what's going on with the collective. So for somebody who's really private with a chart like this, with most all of his personal planets beneath the horizon, it's almost like this eclipse catapults him out into the open, and we will see the effects of this eclipse really be amplifying between now and the new year, because Jupiter is going to sit at 5 degrees, and it will eventually go direct around 5 degrees as well at the beginning of the year. So you guys are going to see more themes revolving around Bill Gates coming up for a number of reasons. This is just one of them. I know many astrologers have speculated and said that this is an eclipse that is almost planting seeds for things that are yet to come. And that will be taking place in like spring of 2024 as we see planets cross these degrees and reactivate this eclipse. Anyway, when we look at the other aspects of his chart, you know, I think also about how whether it's his public reputation or his relationships, that's also kind of been in the spotlight in recent years. I think a lot of that really is tied to the fact that, you know, Saturn has been going through Aquarius. We saw back in 2020, Saturn came into an opposition with Uranus. In recent years, it's been big news that he split from his wife and that there was like a divorce of his long-term partner, Melinda. I wonder if this had anything to do with Saturn's opposition to Uranus. Obviously, just Saturn being in the 7th house isn't enough to end a relationship, but I think about how that opposition activated his Chiron, and it could have brought up some kind of wounds in regards to this relationship as a result of his Uranian behavior. And when that happened, there were squares to his sun, and we also saw Uranus in Taurus. So it's very obvious that there were big changes going on with relationships, his public reputation, as well as his professional life, really from 2020 on. Now, as that Saturn enacted a grand fixed cross in his chart, eventually it kind of broke off. You know, we saw that kind of calm down. Uranus finished opposing his sun. Saturn eventually went into Pisces. But just recently, we've seen Pluto emerge into the sign of Aquarius, and that has a whole other set of things that are kind of going on with that. This started for him in the spring of 2023. We see Pluto in Aquarius coming into conjunction with Chiron at 0 degrees of Aquarius. Now, 0 degrees of Aquarius is seen as the most unconventional, the most futuristic, the most rebellious. It's just getting used to this energy in regards to the expression of that sign. And we know that Chiron deals with like wounding, isolation, separation. Aquarius could quite literally be from the masses. It could be from his friends, right? 7th house. So here comes Pluto now, kind of following in the same steps as where Saturn was, which has been in opposition to Uranus. So we're definitely going to see a continuation with the Pluto-Chiron conjunction of wounding in regards to his public image, because the 7th house is how we meet others and how other people see us. And as Pluto in the next couple of months reaches about 2 degrees, it will oppose Uranus. So Uranus at a 2 can indicate some kind of funding, some kind of support, exposure revolving around taxes, investments, and things he's been participating in. And then we'll start to see Pluto coming in for the kill shot with a square to his sun. It's pretty safe to say that if the Saturn transit 2020 to 2022 was any kind of consolation in regards to the direction that he was going in with relationships, Pluto's going to come in, and I think it's going to further amplify some of that, some of those challenges. Now, on the flip side, you know, this is a Cancer rising chart, so the ruler is the moon. We've got activations going on with his moon that's sitting in his equal or his Placidus 9th house. So it's obvious that he's seen as like, oh, I'm a philanthropist, and, you know, I travel and I help people and I'm doing all of these things. That could be very Sagittarius kind of 9th house-like. But we are going to be seeing eclipses that will be impacting his planets in Aries as well as Libra. So if we look at what we just had here recently, let's go to the eclipses. There we go. We had an eclipse that was there we go. Sorry guys, wrong year. We had an eclipse that was very close to his IC just recently on the 14th. And this was within his home and family. So it is possible that there's, you know, changes going on with where he's living, his family, his relatives, all of that stuff. Mercury has been involved as well, so it does seem like there has been some discussions about relationships and family. I have seen recently a bunch of like stuff in like, you know, some of the gossip magazines or columns revolving around his daughter just went through a breakup with somebody, now she's like seeing somebody else. So it's interesting to see like that kind of emerge in the midst of this stellium involving, you know, Mercury, which can be media, and Mars, which can be children. But that eclipse was sandwiched between Mercury, which is about potentially hidden relationships. You know, Mercury conjunct the IC. It's the 12th house ruler. It's also the 3rd house ruler, or some news coming out about his international relations. After all, you know, the South Node is connected to Mercury as well. So that does seem to indicate that there is getting ready to be stuff that's being released. And then we have that second eclipse that's going to come through. But, you know, the South Node is swinging through the southern part of his chart. So it's almost like there might be some karmic exposure or clearing out in regards to the relationships that he's had with his past. I don't really expect his wife to do like a tell-all. I haven't looked at her chart, but I really see this more as, you know, people who have interacted with him in the past might be stepping forward and talking about interactions, conversations that they had with him, and giving their hot take on their interpretation or their impression of Bill Gates and ultimately the direction that he's going with things. Now, on the other side of this, we will be seeing eclipses that will be coming through still in the spring. You know, we're going to see a lunar eclipse in Libra, pretty close to his natal Mars. So I do feel like that is going to be bringing more up to the surface in a much more public way. The 3rd house eclipse conjunct his Mars can be definitely more talk about him, media, discussions, and stuff revolving around his past. While we have all these planets going through the top part of his chart, a retrograde in his 10th house, this eclipse in general is going to oppose his moon. So I see this as a much more challenging eclipse versus, you know, the one that we're about to have in October, where, you know, he might get some publicity, he might get some media. It might challenge basically what he's invested in because of the opposition to his sun. But I think this eclipse where the sun and the moon come together and the moon is going to oppose does feel a little bit more challenging for me. Then we're going to see on April 8th, 2024, a solar eclipse in the sign of Aries in his 10th house within a 2-degree orb of his MC. So this is very visual. New moon solar eclipse conjunct Chiron with Mercury retrograde. Let it be known, if there is something that's really going to be making big headlines, that is going to definitely challenge the narrative of whether or not Bill Gates is a monster or a good guy or a bad guy or who he makes himself out to be, I believe this is going to be a bigger conversation that's going to be much more in the public right around April, May of 2024. Now, we know that these eclipses play out over time, so I can't just say like, hey, April, you know, that's when he's going to go through some kind of like public trial, but I can tell you guys that that's when you're going to start to kind of see more that's being brought out, especially with Mercury retrograding coming into conjunction with that degree of the eclipse with Chiron right around mid-April of 2024. Especially interesting to see how that eclipse, you know, is ruled by Aries. The dispositor is Mars. It's conjunct Saturn. I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about truth coming out revolving around pharmaceutical companies and like where individuals perhaps need and should be held accountable for their involvement in regards to what has happened over the past few years. I look at this and I think that, you know, you can only say or see so much from eclipses. You really have to look at return charts. You have to also look at progressions. But something else kind of peeped up for me that caught my attention. And this one is a little bit harder to perhaps find. You have to kind of get into fixed stars to look at this one. But I'm referencing this conjunction that he has in Scorpio. So he's got Venus in Scorpio, in conjunction with Saturn in Scorpio with about a 1-degree orb, a little less than that. That conjunction sits in conjunction to a star that is called, I'm going to probably mispronounce this, but that's okay, Ona Uka Alahe. Ona Nuka Alhe, I think that's what it's called. And this fixed star is around 22 degrees of Scorpio. So it's got about a 2-degree orb. So 20, 21, 22 is all within a degree of this particular star. Now, this fixed star is connected, and this is per Astro Kings. So this is where I'm getting my resources from. Immorality, accidents, violence, danger of poison. And according to Ptolemy, this has the nature of Saturn, Mars, Saturn, Venus, and kind of like a Venus-Mars conjunction. So it deals with Saturn, boundaries, limitation, endings, death, especially in Scorpio, illness, sickness, unhappiness, you know, Venus. So if you guys have that conjunction, don't freak out. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen to you, but for me, it's interesting because we're going to see, you know, Uranus in the spring oppose these degrees. We're going to see a new moon that we're about to have in conjunction to these degrees pretty soon. So that's, I think, kind of important because the oppositions to his Saturn and Venus is going to really paint a picture in regards to, once again, relationships and how the public or how other people are seeing him. And whether or not he is being included or recognized with certain groups, right? Uranus and Jupiter are going to be meeting in the 11th. Now, when I show you guys the new moon that I'm talking about, it's going to be this one right here. So we're going to have a new moon, okay? It'll be in Scorpio at 20 degrees. So it's going to be right on top of his Venus, in conjunction to Saturn, and Mars and Saturn will be conjunct. So here's what I have for this. When you see these configurations, natally, this gives the native criminal inclinations, immorality. It makes native bold and shameless or revolting. There can be a rise followed by a fall from favor. The star is negative and should be used in conjunction with only negative placements. Judge carefully. Okay, so that's why we're looking at Saturn and Venus and Mars being in configuration, especially with there being like a mutual reception between Mars and Venus, you know, something changeable in regards to relationships, resources, investments, stuff like that. Okay, so the star Corserpetus is of the nature of Mars, but classical astrologers say it's the nature of Saturn in any event. It's an evil mischief maker, presaging accidents, violence of all kinds. Now, this particular star is seen as the neck of the serpent. It shows its properties as a Martian force combined with Saturn and is often really dangerous and destructive. There can be chronic diseases which are not easily detected, and it will result in a weakened state of health, and operations will be necessary. There will be accidents. The head of the snake, or the neck rather than the head, is where the snake has its brain, its seat of knowledge. So the star is all about knowledge that the good doctor has won from his labors. That knowledge is where we came from, where we are, where we're going, what holds us back, and what to do about healing. The Saturn-Mars stars, a Serpetus, does measure some merit. The black reputation does measure the merit of the black reputation it has gained from the debasers of astrology. For those who will abuse and misuse the gifts available here are deserving of being struck off the register of any corrupt doctor. Those who will give service in healing or teaching of what they receive have only good fortune to expect that the snake shines upon them. This half of the snake, by the way, is the man's left, known as the serpent's caput, the head. The snake counted a different constellation from the Serpentis Cauda, the tail side, which is the man's right. Okay, so lots of mumbo jumbo there, but basically the connection to medicine and knowing how to treat and using that inner knowing and wisdom revolving around healing arts wisely for good things, and if not, then there could be a public fall from grace. Now, when Venus is conjunct, which he has natally, it will emit jealousy of own sex, bad for domestic matters, favorable for gain, secret death, probably by poison. These natives are envious and can be cold-hearted, subject to domestic problems and romantic issues. When Saturn is involved, you see secret insanity, drug takers, drug pushers, secret grime and poisoning often for no reason, shrewd, cunning, intelligent, studious, often a physician, nurse, usually unmarried, and may commit suicide or be confined to an asylum or to a prison. Mars conjunct this placement indicates violence, quarrels, lying, crime, violent death, probably by poison. Interesting. And with that being said, new moons can act like a solar eclipse sometimes, especially if you have Mars there, because this is going to be a solar eclipse that's going to be opposition to Uranus, which means whatever is seated, let's say from his birthday to this new moon, within that 2-week period, 6 months later, when we see the full moon in Taurus, which will not be an eclipse, we're done with those eclipses, in the spring of 2024, I'm imagining that's when we start to see the fruit of what this particular star may be suggesting. Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's go 6 months into the future. So this will be the full moon in Taurus, 2024. Oops. What's this one? Oh, I'm sorry, the full moon in Scorpio. Take that back. There we go. Okay, so then we're going to have a full moon, okay, because that was a new moon, so it completes. We're going to have a full moon on April 23rd, 2024. Right after that retrograde period. The retrograde is still taking place after the eclipse. We're going to have a full moon that's going to be on his sun, so it's bringing to light now situations revolving around the past, what's hidden, what's secretive. At the time of this eclipse, Mars is the ruler, and Mars is coming into conjunction with Neptune. Watch Bill Gates in the spring of 2024. I mean, this sounds insensitive, but I don't really see Bill Gates doing anything to hurt or harm himself. At least him not doing it. Although there's been a series of events where we've seen a number of people who get kind of involved or kind of corrupted by some of the stuff that's been going on with some of the swampiness that unalive themselves. But I'm not really seeing that from him. Now, something else that kind of comes to mind that I can't quite find it in my notes, but there was lots of excerpts that I was reading that was talking about, being held accountable for some of this stuff. Now, whether or not he is, that's neither here nor there. But I wonder if that's going to be part of what's going to come up. You know, I think about the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction at the time where when we have this full moon, there's a lot of things that are opposing stuff in his chart that's particularly challenging. You've got a full moon that is going to be on your sun with the opposition to the sun. So this is where other people's egos are challenging you. You're going to have Jupiter and Uranus. So this is going to represent legal cases. You know, it can also be about foreign affairs, and Uranus, which is sudden shocks and surprises. This might be turns of fate in regards to people who he thought he was like close with or friends with. That is no longer aligning with him. So that will exactly oppose where we had that new moon that was right on his Venus and his Saturn. Now, when this comes through, we're also going to start to see Jupiter and Uranus begin to square his natal Jupiter and his Pluto. And these are financial houses, where the second house is what he possesses. The fifth house is what he gambled on. The 11th house represents ultimately what he brings in. And it can be about the money that he brings in from business. So it'll be interesting to see if there is like a sudden turn or twist of fate. You know, is it this massive amount of resources that can come in? Is it a fall that really negatively impacts him? You know, the 11th house is collective. So collective investors or people who buy products, especially relating to Taurus-related things. So I'm especially interested to see the work that he's doing more with like where technology meets the body, or, you know, food and growth and environmental or humanitarian related things. Just some food for thought. And then finally, this North Node is coming into conjunction with his moon. And that's a pretty big turning point considering the fact that the moon rules this chart. Eclipses will be nearby. Let's see. But I don't think it's going to be, it's not going to be for some time. So we will see an eclipse that's going to be coming through here. This will be March of 2025, which will be the closest one that I've seen to his natal moon. It'll be after the moon conjuncts the North Node. I speculate maybe it could be a second partner, but, you know, especially at a 7, this can be about a new, younger, you know, person that he kind of takes up with. But I also feel like it's going to be about him embracing that identity of the Aries moon, of the fighter, of pushing back, of challenging things, especially with moon in opposition to Mars. He's going to feel like he's going to have to defend himself a little bit more. Very similar to when he went through these eclipses in the early 2000s. So honestly, don't know a lot about his professional history. I don't care to go into that, but I wonder if there's going to be similar themes revolving around him pushing or fighting for something, because he's going to activate that kind of archetype of Aries. And, you know, Pluto will hover around his Chiron for the next year and continue to square his Neptune. And so I really feel like what it potentially is like the removing of the mask. You know, I reference Scooby-Doo a lot. The removing of the mask of the monster is people talking about it, not accusing him necessarily, but opening up that public discussion, that public forum, you know, 7th house, the debate of, well, why is he doing this? And like, you know, he doesn't have a background in medicine. This guy was a computer programmer. Like, why does he have an interest and an influence in being able to solve, you know, some of these like medical crises around the world? I don't know. For me, the solar return is probably pretty telling. I haven't even looked at it, to be honest with you. There you go. Ooh, that's a scary chart. That looks like Biden's chart. So we've got, this is his solar return. I'm doing it from Seattle because I'm sure he's all over the world, but I don't know where he lives. So I will sometimes take the solar return from the natal. 27 degrees rising. He also has the stellium of Scorpio planets in the 8th house, and a solar return with the 12th house stellium is a year of behind the scenes wrapping things up, completions under the realm of Scorpio related things. So hidden things, things involving regeneration, transformation, psychological triggers, stuff that he needs to heal. But this is also like backroom deals, negotiating, things that are secretive. 12th house can be foreign lands, private spaces, institutions, hospitals. So we may assume that A lot of the work that he's doing is behind the scenes. You know, some of you guys may look at this and go, oh, is he going to jail? I don't know. I can't really speculate that, but the 12th house would fall under those places. And like I said, the eclipse is going to be basically within, you know, hours of his solar return. It's going to be just leading up to it because it'll be at a 5. What's interesting here is that when we look at the sheer amount of placements in the 6th and the 12th house, the 6th house can talk about employees, it can talk about health, daily routine, habits, and patterns. But the 12th house talks about not the physical side of things, the emotional, the psychological, the spiritual side. And so the 6th house can also be about health and addiction related issues. I do wonder if a lot of his work is going to be moving to other areas or into other countries where he's going to be more so received, because the moon is the fastest moving planet in the 6th house. So I could see like moving some of his, you know, his philanthropy work or some of his, you know, his trials or testing or whatever he's doing to another location. I also think with the moon being in its exaltation in close proximity to Jupiter, this can indicate that there is some kind of wealth coming or expansion when it comes to 6th house Taurus things. So this could be food production, this can be grocery stores, this could be you know, moving and transporting things, this could be medical services, 6th house, but through Taurus. So I think of like herbal supplements, I think of herbal remedies, I think of organic foods. And we know actually that he does, you know, produce or own an insane amount of agricultural land. He is selling produce. He does do that. And that's why there's been such a big kind of talk revolving around what foods he's producing. I think I've read articles about him producing apples and other things that have that appeal stuff on it. But I feel like this is where you're going to see a mass amount of his growth that's going to come from. So I would be watching to see what's going on with some of his agricultural moves. The moon can be the brain. It can also be home or emotions. Jupiter can be the liver, and Uranus can be things revolving around the nervous system. And so while this is physical habits, the opposition to the 12th is like the psychological things that are going on. So to have a Sun, Mercury, Mars in the 12th house, to me feels restless. It feels like it's hiding, crawling out of its skin. This is also about finally coming to terms with completing things. So there may be a sense of him exiting some arenas professionally to move into something new. Very similar to Sagittarius rising charts right now, where there's just a lot kind of brewing behind the scenes that can feel very frustrating. Especially with Mercury and Mars in that really tight conjunction, that's going to be in direct opposition to Jupiter. And so there is definitely going to be a sense of stretching yourself very thin. Some would call, you know, Bill Gates very lucky. Some would call him a bit strategic, but just interesting to see him make some of the moves and the investments that he's made in previous years prior to like this global pandemic. So I, for one, am going to be watching and seeing, like I said, what moves he's making revolving around these Taurus topics, if he is anticipating some other worldwide or kind of global black swan event. The only other thing that I would say is that, you know, he does have the point of fortune in conjunction to his descendant, and that can talk about really significant turning points or moments in time where he's meeting significant people or connecting with significant people, or there is something, because it is, you know, it is setting that we're becoming aware of. So with Uranus being there, it could be, you know, health issues, issues with family, things that are, you know, private that are starting to become public. And to be honest with you guys, if I remember correctly, I sometimes, very rarely, but for more so for research, I will use the Arabic lots. I don't know if you know what that is, but the Arabic lots are a series of calculations that you can use for any particular events or things. And I was calculating some of his Arabic lots and pulling a bunch of them up just to see if anything kind of popped up that seemed prominent for me. And I believe he has an Arabic lot conjunct 25 or 26 degrees of Taurus. I don't recommend doing this, okay, because you have to really know how to look at progress charts, return charts, and you need to see reoccurring themes for one of these Arabic lots to hit. But I remember looking at, I don't know if it was the point of death or if it was the point of suicide, and it was around 25, 26 degrees. And so it's interesting to see that point of fortune return to that. Once again, purely just speculation, not saying it's going to happen, not hoping it happens, but seeing the sheer amount of planets in the 12th house and the chart ruler in conjunction to Mercury, which is the mind and what can be hidden or secretive, and things that are behind closed doors in opposition to Jupiter, means that he may be privileged to some information, knowing that there's going to be, higher death numbers or higher death rates, which we're already seeing across the world, or that there may be some situations that he encounters that unlocks that lot, which deals with the part or the point of death. It could be death threats. I mean, obviously, some of this stuff is sensitive, but it could be things suggesting that, he has caused this. So astrology can be used literally or figuratively, but yeah, that definitely comes to mind for me. And probably one of the other challenging things is that the modern day ruler, Pluto, is in a square to the north and the south node. So it does kind of suggest that there is a really significant kind of fateful turning event that's happening. And it's all about what he says out loud, right? 27 degrees is about communication. Third house is media, paperwork, things that are old. There's tons of stuff out there about, stuff that he has said in newspapers dating back to like the 90s, where he has flat out said, okay, we don't really read newspapers physically anymore. Not many people are saving them like they used to, but he has talked very openly about depopulation agendas. He has, and he has said things revolving around the use of, vaccinations and influencing things. And he has a very checkered kind of past in regards to some of his dealings, in particular in Africa with fertility issues and the use of vaccines. And yeah, it's some messy stuff. But I would be looking at this as, what is Bill Gates saying out loud? And where do we really need to be looking at what he has said in the past and maybe potentially kind of take it seriously, because it may be something that's painting a picture in terms of what's coming in the future. Now, for fun, I like to sometimes lay the natal chart over the progress chart or over the solar return chart to see if there's anything that kind of lines up. Well, if you guys notice, there is a number of planets or conjunctions that are moving to some really important parts of the sky. For me, probably the biggest one is that Venus-Saturn, is coming into conjunction, or it's getting ready to rise on the ascendant, which means it may be bringing up the themes of that particular star that I spoke to you guys about, that had connections to, death by poison, or things that can be indicating that there's secret crimes or things connected to insanity and some pretty gnarly things that are going to be taking place. Equally, Juno sits on his ascendant, and so this will be a year where I do think he may take on a really significant new partnership of some kind. It doesn't have to be romantic, but a partnership might be something that we see coming up for him, especially with eclipses in the 9th house. It could be, a teacher or a mentor who he's partnering with. And then we see that really infamous Jupiter-Pluto conjunction returning to the midheaven at the top part of his chart. And so to see Jupiter sit conjunct the midheaven, squaring the ascendant and the descendant, it's almost reiterating a lot of that eclipse that we saw in the 10th house. That's like, hey, a lot of your shit's coming to the public sphere this year. People are going to be seeing your wealth, right? Jupiter in Leo, your leadership. But the conjunction to Pluto has a little bit of a different tinge. It's, the abuse maybe of power and leadership. The dispositor, being the sun, and the sun's in the 12th house, where it's shining a light on, what he may or may not have done to get to that point. I can only connect this to other people, like, Vladimir Putin has a, Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, I believe, in Leo at the top part of his chart as well. And we're seeing, a retrograde there. Now we're seeing planets that are opposing and squaring that. And we're hearing headlines, whether or not it's true or not, of him having heart problems recently and apparently suffering from a heart attack. Once again, speculation, but very Pluto-Leo things, especially with Uranus squares and, that being really prominent, post-retrograde right on the midheaven. It would not surprise me if we're hearing themes revolving around a potential heart-related issue, Pluto is squaring his sun, or we can be hearing themes revolving around just stuff that's affecting his public reputation. No coincidence that he's got Pluto and Jupiter in conjunction to Regulus, which has associations with the mark of a king, regal, royal, but also a very, very significant public fall that can happen if you're not really behaving or leading in the way that a leader should. So with Pluto on his with Saturn on his ascendant, the squares to Pluto and Jupiter on his midheaven, your boy is going to be under the microscope. And part of me feels inclined to wonder if there is a sense of him really lying low this year because of that stellium of planets in the 12th house, only to be reemerging with answers, solutions, other things that could be coming up in the spring. And that's pretty much it. So I will leave it at that. Oh, actually one other thing. His progress chart. There we go. This is his progress chart. This is his secondary progressions. He's a Virgo rising, and he's got Saturn on his descendant. So it's bringing a lot of attention to his relationships publicly, and also, you know, his relationships with people involved in the health field, 6 on the descendant. Eclipses affecting his moon. But this is a Mercury ruled chart, and we have got Pluto coming into conjunction with Mercury. Okay, so that's another indication that there could be some health stuff going on here. So when we look at the transits, I'm really watching Pluto's reemergence into Aquarius. And when Mercury and Pluto and Mars come into conjunction with his progressed Mercury. So February 5th through the 15th. I'm curious to see what is emerging, what's happening. That's some really killer transits. Outer planets affecting a progressed ascendant definitely does have health implications. This is on the cusp of his 6th house, ruled by Uranus, and it's all making oppositions to Uranus. Once again, for me, nervous-related things, heart-related things, you know, poisoning in general, there's a number of degrees that deal with that. Generally, we can see some Neptune stuff, we can see some Scorpio stuff. But also, you know, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in this chart is coming into an opposition with his Mars, which is the progressed 8th house ruler. So you got some stuff here that's a little dicey. Reminds me similarly, with all respect, obviously rest in peace, to Nicola's chart. You know, he was a Virgo rising, and he had a stellium of planets in Aquarius, and I know that he was like a smoker, but I also, you know, don't think that he was aware of potentially just how much some of the upper respiratory issues he was having was going to affect him. From what I understand, he died either from complications from COVID, but he was having some like breathing related issues. And he had Aquarius in the 6th house, and Saturn was going through there, and it was squaring some stuff. So we've got Pluto coming into a square with Neptune and opposing Uranus, his 6th house lord, followed by eclipses and a retrograde in the 8th house. So I'm curious to see what's going on with this next year. All right, we'll move on to the next villain. You guys have heard enough about Bill Gates. I could go on and on and on about that forever. Let's talk about Klaus Schwab. Okay, so full disclosure on this, and I'm always like really upfront with you guys about where I get my sources from. I don't like using noon charts or 6 a.m. charts. If I can help it, I don't do it. I also sat around and tried to kind of like rectify his chart. And essentially I was like, okay, he's either got to be a late degree Aries rising or he's got to be a Taurus rising. That's what I kind of came to in terms of kind of playing around with this chart for about a month or so. And then I did some research on the internet, and I found an astrologer. His name is Graham Ebel. I will plug his the link to this article in my video, who did a whole thing on this like a year or two ago on Klaus Schwab, and he, I guess, specializes in rectification, and he wrote an article about the rectification of his chart and determined that he believes he was born on March 30th, 1938. We know that that's when he was born. At 7:46 a.m. in Ravensburg, Germany. Okay, so interesting. He came up with 21 degrees Taurus rising. the more that I studied his chart and then read this article and went back and forth, I was like, I really do feel like this guy knows what he's talking about. And definitely a lot of like his life events seem to match up with this. So full disclosure, we don't know what time that he was born. Could I put his sun on the ascendant? Yeah, but I really feel like he had to be a late degree Aries or a Taurus rising. And I think this resonates. So this is where I'm getting my information from. Okay, so who is Klaus Schwab? Well, I'm sure you guys have seen him. He kind of looks like a Bond villain. You see him through all like the World Economic Forum videos. I Google search, who is he? And this is what I got. Klaus Schwab is a German engineer and economist who is best known as the founder of and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum is a Swiss-based non-governmental organization established in 1971. It is a platform for global leaders of various fields, including politics, business, academia, civil society, and they come together to discuss addressing pressing global issues in society. He founded the forum and essentially fosters dialogue, collaboration between leaders and stakeholders from different sectors and find solutions to global challenges. The WEF is perhaps the most famous for its annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, which brings together a wide range of influential figures around the world. Okay, so he's an advocate for addressing global issues such as climate change, income inequality, technological disruption, and his work through the World Economic Forum has a significant impact on global economic and political discussions. But you have heard things, I am going to assume, if you know who this is, like you will eat the bugs, or that we need to prepare for a much angrier, scarier world. Or we have penetrated all of the cabinets, right? These are all like terrifying, but like in your face, honest statements that we have heard from this person in recent years. Fascinating. The chart really, I mean, for me, is pretty fucking terrifying, to be honest with you. So let's break this down. I think probably the thing that piqued my interest the most was the fact that he, one way or another, has this insane stellium that in this case is in the 12th house, but it really goes all the way from Saturn through Mars. So he's got a huge fixation on Aries and Taurus, which is what I initiate, what I create, and then what comes from it, what resources come from it, what I possess, what I grow, what I have. Now, the 12th house is hidden, secretive, things that we cannot see. It's also fascinating to see all of this Aries, Saturn, Sun, Venus, and Mercury intercepted in the 12th house, which is like doubly hidden and blind. Traditionally, Taurus does have Aries as the 12th house, but when you're working with Placidus, you can see interceptions, and this is where houses can swallow up signs. So it essentially means that the themes of these particular signs are challenges or blind spots. So, Aries can be about, what you're going after, what you're pursuing, what you're, instigating, initiating, starting. And that there can be some blind spots revolving around what you see or what your, in this case, Sun, Saturn goals or limits are versus that of the collective, right? 12th house. Then we see the themes of like Libra. So, finding it challenging to relate. It's fascinating that we see Mars and Venus, which are the rulers of these two signs, in mutual reception. So we've got Mars in a Venus sign. We've got Venus in a Mars sign. So they're kind of speaking the same language, saying the same thing. Hey, when it comes to relations, there's some challenges here, Venus and Aries. Fighting to make, to bring people together, conflict resulting in resources. And then we've got Mars in Taurus, where it is notoriously a little slow, sluggish. It doesn't really want to get angry, but when it does, it really erupts, especially with that conjunction to Uranus. For me, 11 degrees is always the mark of something that is very innovative and different and unusual, but it can also be something that can be electrifying, or it can be sudden, it could be sharp, unexpected, out of the blue. So in my mind, there's nothing scarier or potentially more dangerous, especially with like a Mars in the 12th house, which can be a little blind, with a Mars conjunct Uranus around these degrees.
Not too wild about these degrees personally. That makes me feel like there is something very angry or violent that is not really seen on the surface. You guys see him and he looks like somebody's like grandpa, or like I said, something out of like a James Bond villain scene. He doesn't seem like somebody who is traditionally warrior Aries type, but there is a lot more than what meets the eye. Venus is the ruler here, and Venus is sandwiched between Mercury and the Sun. Obviously, Venus is about relationships, and Taurus risings generally want beauty, security, stability, and resources. They want abundance. They want to be connected with nature. And anybody who has seen him, talk publicly, whether it's in the forum or in, other videos and interviews that he's done, he's very adamant about his vision, right? We've seen he's put out that book, the Great Reset, his vision for the future, very Sun, Saturn, 12th house in Aries, what I'm hoping to accomplish. Now, like I said, he founded the World Economic Forum, so, established in 1971, apparently. No coincidence that this has been something that's been brewing in recent years, as we have seen Uranus tear through the 12th house in his chart, where he has been meeting secretly 12th house with, elected officials, Uranus, and what he's been instigating. Recently just had his Uranus return. It also came into conjunction with his Mars, and now we're getting ready to see both Jupiter and Uranus emerge, rising on his ascendant. Here is that 21 degrees that we're going to see that's going to get activated in the spring of 2024. So in my mind, I'm like, oh man, here comes Klaus's grand reveal for what he anticipates the future is going to be. Now, for me, what's terrifying is that he has said in so many ways, especially in recent months, to many global leaders, turn over the power, things are getting unreal, let the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and the World Health Organization, let us help govern the world, and has really been like a spokesperson for this globalist vision for the future. You own nothing, you'll be happy. There's no need for you to be able to, focus on possessing things. You can't control things. Let us handle it. Very Sun, Mars, Aries in the 12th house. But we also know that, he comes from a military family. He comes from a background that's in the military. There's been a lot of discussion about relatives of his that were involved with the Nazi regime. I'm not going to say that that's true because we don't have the sources. But I will tell you that it's clear in his chart that he comes from a very strict, rigid kind of mindset about how the world should be, and that he prefers to rule or guide, especially leaders, behind the scenes. All right, so outside of that terrifying 12th house stellium, we've got Sun and Saturn at 8 degrees, okay? So 8 degrees is a scorpionic degree. It's about death, regeneration, change, transformation. Mars is the dispositor of these two planets, and we have Mars conjunct Uranus in Taurus in the 12th house. So I'm going to make a bold statement here. There is no doubt when I look at this chart that he does believe fundamentally that we do need to have decreased population. Taurus is about birth. It's about life. It's about growth. And when we see Mars and Uranus, it's about instructing people behind the scenes. It's like, hey, we need more wars. We need more conflict. Let's stir up some chaos. We need less people. We need to cut rates of people, right? We need less consuming. We need less meat, less dairy, less cows. Uranus in Taurus. So there is an incentive to kind of create chaos to better help propel him, especially with that Jupiter, right at the top of his chart, into being in a position of power or being a leader. It's like, this stuff's going on. Here's the problem. Let's present you a solution. That's really scary for me. I think that, Jupiter hovering around this now tells me that there's already something that's kind of in the mix that's being planned. Uranus is that spark that leads to something, and Mars is kind of lighting the match and, fueling the whole thing. So Jupiter will be here. You're going to see in the spring of next year, there is going to be some movement that you're probably going to hear from him that's going to be like, now's the time, here we go, guys, get ready. It's time for us to all be working together as leaders, and this is when he's going to be wanting to take his spotlight. The irony of also, along with Bill Gates, talking about things like death panels, like, well, how much money do we spend to keep people alive? Is it a good idea to be keeping somebody on a ventilator or older people alive for a shorter period of time when that money could be better used elsewhere? Those aren't my words, these are their words. But it's interesting to hear him talk about people's place in society and how much they contribute. And once you get to a certain age, you're a useless eater, and we may not necessarily need older people. When this guy, I mean, I can't even like do math right now. This guy is like, what? How old is he? Let me pull out my calculator. I don't even know. I don't want to get into it because it's gonna piss me off. But I know that part of his philosophy and his belief system is that we need less people, and also that we need to be clearing the way for new generations to come in and really be focusing on almost like indoctrinating younger people into believing that the world should be a certain way, and kind of doing away with elders in society and not really giving them the place that I think that they deserve. Anyway, and this is coming from somebody who is like clearly over 60, 70 years old. So is he going to be the first one that's going to offer himself up as a part of this vision? Probably not. Usually people who come up with these crazy ideas are not the ones who want to do it. But what you are going to see with these transits that are going to be coming on his ascendant is his grand reveal. You are also getting ready to see eclipses and the North Node coming into conjunction with his sun. So right now it's sitting conjunct his Venus, so that does indicate that there is an awareness of resources and wealth that's going to be coming in the future. And then we're going to see eclipses and the North Node that's very close to his personal planets in the spring. And there we go. Looks like the North Node's going to be hovering around his Sun and Saturn. Now, some people who practice degree astrology might look at that and be like, well, this is the end of Mr. Schwab. And not that I'm a fan of Putin, but it's been interesting to see Putin come out on Russian television and flat out tell people like, yeah, like we consider, Klaus Schwab or Bill Gates to be like, enemies of the state. He specifically named Klaus Schwab, by the way. Specifically, he said he's given military orders to see them as a threat, and anybody else who is supporting him within his cabinet on television. So he's got a target on his back. By the way, Mr. Bill Gates, these guys have to be friends, right? Like with this Saturn, Sun, Moon conjunction. So Bill Gates is his moon is conjunct his Saturn and his Sun. So I wonder, are they connected? How close are they? Does Klaus Schwab work as a mentor to Bill Gates in some way with this conjunction? Is there some sense of him talking to him about passing the torch? I know that we've got Harari and a couple other people who are up there as well. But for me, it almost seems as if either he's coming to the end of what his mission is and he's getting ready for the big reveal before passing things along, or we're about to see, some kind of awareness that's coming through when the North Node's hitting his Sun, Saturn, and Saturn's on his moon, that people are really starting to reveal, what his public nature really is. And I think of Jupiter Uranus on the ascendant as being either a maverick or an evil genius, right? Uranus can be about genius. Interesting to see that with Saturn on his moon. I mean, definitely he himself has got some health-related things that do kind of pop up for me. Watching, Pluto be a part of a opposition to his natal Pluto and his natal Mercury. It can mean that his thought process is kind of wearing thin. I mean, we've heard things where in recent weeks, he's been making statements going like, he's having trouble sleeping at night, and, he knows that the world is angry, and we're seeing videos of like him in Europe and people are attacking his car where his driver's trying to get him out of parking lots in public places, and people are yelling and screaming. We're also seeing that he's, very open about the fact that he's seeing a resistance to the evolution of the globalist movement or the elitist movement, right? bizarre to me that somebody would just be so outspoken about being like, yes, we're elitists. You know, and being an elitist means that you inherently believe that you are better and above other people. So that in itself kind of tells you that there is this sense of feeling holier than thou. And then you look into some of the other things going on with the forum outside of the intent to create chaos or a more angry world. We hear more about AI and technology and kind of like playing God. Then you see some of the stuff that's going on in like the World Economic Forum, some of these like weird robes and things they're wearing. It does take on this very cult leader vibe that comes from his 12th house, of that stellium of I am the savior. It is me who will lead you into, the new order. South Node being on his ascendant and that disassociation or disconnection with his body, and Uranus coming there soon, Jupiter coming there soon, that is conjunct fixed star Algol, which was about losing your mind or things involving mind control, mind manipulation, chip implants, things connecting technology to the brain, where data and information can be received from the bodies. Like if you guys are watching some of the stuff that's coming out from the World Economic Forum, I don't think that that's too far off from the future when they discuss things like CBDCs and being able to pay for things with, chips and other things. Starts to kind of make you wonder, where is this going? And what is the ultimate end goal here? I think with Jupiter and Uranus on his South Node, some people might look at it as him losing his mind. Other people might look at that as beheading, right? Because that's what, at least here in America, we used to do for people who were treasonous, but he's not necessarily American. Most of these individuals conduct their business, obviously, in Switzerland, where it's neutral and, there's no real kind of involvement, at least publicly, from the government, so they can do as they please. But it's pretty safe to say that with some of these transits that he's got going on, that there is a grand reveal coming. And I do anticipate that with the North Node transit, the Saturn Moon transit, there is going to be a real move to try to further instill instructions in certain leaders, like those who come from, the Young Leaders Group in the World Economic Forum, Trudeau, Macron. Biden's certainly not young, but he's a part of that. And many other leaders who have relations to the World Economic Forum, which he is, kind of creating these gatherings and instructing. And many other people, it's not limited to just that. If you go and take a look at these incoming C40 cities here in the United States, although I think that it's going to be several dozen cities that I've seen. Many of it is connected to mayors of certain cities who are signing up for these global initiatives to not be able to have private vehicles, to not be able to consume dairy or meat, to not be able to travel outside of certain areas, to implement CBDCs. In order to do that, there has to be a digital ID, right? And so really the long and short of it is clearly he's working in some global way to incentivize and create a centralized network of authority, of power, a one world government, a one world banking situation, a one world medical situation. And he does have correlations and connections with the World Economic Forum, but similar to, like I said, that of the Hydra, it has heads and it branches into other things that some may say have connections to the World Health Organization, some might say the United Nations. So I'm curious to see what kind of happens in this next year, because it's definitely going to be his moment to try to have his claim to fame. And I definitely feel like the silver lining here, because there is a silver lining, is that the eclipses in the 12th house could quite literally bring all of this stuff out into the open, right? It could blow all of this up and bring this out there, once again, if enough people are talking about it. So you're going to see this sense of him almost kind of like imploding, Mars and Uranus on his ascendant, challenging some of the things that are going on. And, with Jupiter at the top part of his chart, in Aquarius, it means that there is still some reigning order that he's going to be challenging. And what is Jupiter? Moral spiritual, religious, political in Aquarius, truth, justice, rules. So I am curious to see who pushes back against this, who is not necessarily going to go along with the narrative or the agenda. If it's not certain governments or political figures, if it's not, is it possible that it is the collective, right? Maybe. I haven't really looked at his progress chart, in all honesty, but let's look. So he's got progressed Venus coming into conjunction with his ascendant, Pluto opposed Pluto. Here it is, folks. So we've got the progressed moon in Taurus that is getting ready to come into conjunction with Uranus, and then the south node. And if I remember correctly, that's his ascendant. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to see that progressed moon hit his natal Uranus. That's going to be in February. And then it's going to hit Mars. That's going to be in March. And then it's going to hit progressed Uranus. That's going to be in July. And then it's coming for the south node. So I almost feel like this is like him going out with a bang. I know that sounds weird, but that's kind of like the feeling that I'm getting. And, you know, with progressed Venus on the ascendant, and the north node is there, you may see him as almost like being like the savior, or trying to, you know, trying to make himself seen as such. Where's that north node? Oh, it's in Leo. Okay. And then we're going to have the north node conjunct Saturn. There will be eclipses there. So watch for him emerging. I mean, I hate to get like biblical, you know, I don't want to do that on this channel, but when I think about like prophecies of the Bible and talking about like the tribulation and like the 7 years that we're going to have of peace, and like, you know, the false leader that comes and says, I'm going to promise I'm going to fix everything. And then we have like 7 years. I have concerns for that potentially being something along the lines of what an individual like this might do. And like, call me judgmental, whatever. I don't really care. But that's kind of the feeling that I'm getting, because under the veneer of that Taurus rising, there is a lot of really gnarly stuff that sits in his 12th house. And I feel like it's not necessarily something that would be what meets the eye. All right. So on to the next head of the Hydra. And I don't want to get too political with this. You're going to have to do your own research. But I do want to talk about the United Nations. And their chart, and this is their chart, is October 24th, 1945. So they just had a birthday at 4:50 p.m. And that was in Washington, D.C. So this gives the chart an Aries rising, a sun in Scorpio, and a moon in Gemini. All right, so the United Nations is an international organization founded in 1945 after World War II with the primary purpose of promoting peace, security, cooperation, and international development. Its core objectives and purposes are outlined in the UN Charter. So time out. We had the UN Charter. Things didn't necessarily work, creating peace after World War I. We went into World War II. We were still having, you know, obviously conflict globally. We then created the United Nations, which essentially right now is primarily funded. There's multiple countries that fund this, but a mass majority of the funding comes to the United States. And so these are what they claim that their intentions are. But like I said, the whole purpose was to maintain peace, you know, during or after World War II, and we are quite some time after that. So to quote our most recent President Trump, why do we even need the United Nations? Like, what is their purpose, and why are we spending so much for it? But the more that you do research into the UN and you kind of start seeing what's going on, that their connection and their intentions may on the outside seem really good, but I think it's causing some issues. So their intention is to maintain international peace and security. The UN was established to prevent and resolve conflicts between the nations to promote peace. The Security Council, a key organ of the UN, is responsible for addressing threats in international peace and security and authorizing measures, including military action, to address these threats. They also focus on promoting international cooperation. They seek to foster cooperation among countries on a wide variety of global issues, including economic development, societal progress, human rights, environmental sustainability, and it serves as a forum for dialogue, diplomacy to address international changes. They want to focus on protecting human rights. So there's a United Human Rights Council to monitor and address human rights abuse, to develop international law. So they play a role in international court justice. Economic and social development. This includes an initiative to reduce poverty, hunger, disease, and inequality. Humanitarian assistance through the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees and World Food Program. Environmental sustainability. So the Paris Agreement on Climate Change is one of the notable international agreements facilitated by the UN. Promotion of democracy and good governance. The UN promotes efforts to establish and strengthen democratic governments and good government practices around the world. Disarmament. The UN works to prevent nuclear, chemical, and conventional weapons, promotes disarmament and means of reducing the threat of armed conflicts. And cultural exchange education promotes this, and education and preservation of cultural heritage. The UN serves as a platform for diplomatic relations cooperation among member states, which currently sits at 193. It provides a forum for nations to come together, discuss global issues, and work collectively to address the most pressing challenges that face humanity. While UN has achieved many successes over the years, it's also faced many criticisms and challenges to its effectiveness, and it depends on the willingness of member states to cooperate and uphold its principles. All right, so take that for what it's worth. Let's just talk about the astrology of the United Nations chart. Now, this is not a person. This is obviously an organization. But the United Nations has associations and connections with the World Health Organization. So that is one of the branches. There are several, but that is one of the branches in which it funds and it is associated with. So I kind of had to include this to go into that. This gives it an Aries rising chart with the rising being 22 degrees. Moon in Gemini, and the sun is in Scorpio. So it just recently had its birthday. Obviously, this is a Mars ruled chart, and this boasts a Mars in detriment in the sign of Cancer in conjunction to Saturn. So in the fourth house, having Mars, having Saturn in the fourth house also in its fall, and having that conjunction off the bat is what made me go, whoa. That definitely seems to indicate that the action is on nurturing, caretaking, maybe homeless or home-related matters or homeland-related matters where there is destruction, Mars and Saturn. Saturn has connections to the 10th house. I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I really feel like this can be a chart that does somehow indicate that it could also instigate wars, that it could instigate destruction or maybe even like regime change in certain countries. Keep in mind, this is a chart that is the United Nations, but it was founded in the United States. So this is from Washington, D.C., where, like I said, we fund most of this organization. So is it possible that if Mars is the strong arm for this chart and wherever Mars goes is where it does its bidding, it's meant to be kind of, organizing or being involved with wars in foreign lands, so it's not coming home, right? We do see that there are squares from the sun, so it might indicate that, there is some kind of direction that is coming from leaders that's saying, okay, you go here, you do this, you do that. And there certainly is like a lot of I think U.S. involvement. What's interesting about this chart is that also you see, the moon being in conjunction to Uranus, which is also a bit emotionally destabilizing in regards to roots and security. I definitely feel like this is a chart, especially for an organization that claims to want to help refugees or, help get people settled or make them feel secure or help those that are in need. It doesn't really feel as such. Not with Mars and Saturn in a square, not with the moon being in conjunction to Uranus. To me, this feels a little destabilizing, and also something that is potentially like all talk. Like the moon Uranus north node in the third can definitely indicate that there's a lot of, well, this is what we're doing, this is what we're working on, especially with trines to Venus and Neptune. I also think about how, the sun in Scorpio in the 7th house does kind of talk about working through challenges with enemies, or, feeling like there's some kind of interference, Scorpio in the 7th house, from outside, challenges. And this can be leaders, this can be rulers, this can be people who have some kind of like say over what's going on in their home country. And just a vast amount of the placements are really taking place from more or less like the 2nd and the 4th quadrant in the chart. So a lot of it is about relations with other people, right? The United Nations is about the relationship and trying to find peace and diplomacy. But there's nothing peaceful about Mars and Saturn, unless this is like an organization that's truly going in and like protecting and trying to deflect war. But this makes me feel like it's being instigated, especially with the squares to Lilith. Now, with Lilith and the Sun in conjunction, there can be like this fixation with abuse of power or controlling narratives or dictating, what's going on in certain places or who can and cannot move where. As an American, something that I've been following quite a bit in light of some of the stuff that has been happening recently in the United States with the southern border, seeing lots of stuff where there are military-age people, coming in through the border, going to all various cities in the United States, talking about being associated with apparently being like a soldier, right? There's all kinds of stuff on Twitter where people are coming in saying, well, yeah, I'm here. I get a credit card, they're going to call me and like let me know like when I have to like show up and do something. Whether that's true or not, something about the transits, particularly the eclipses that we're having in this chart right now, do make me feel like there's two very big themes afoot. One is going to be this solar eclipse that we just had on the descendant, which does make me feel like there is about to be a lot of challenges or conflict revolving around who the UN is really supporting, or whether or not it is an organization that is trying to provide peace and diplomacy. The more that I do research on the UN's involvement in what's been going on recently in Israel and, like in the Middle East and Syria and like Palestine, the more kind of messy and convoluted it gets. On one hand, you see things where they're calling for ceasefire and they're pushing for peace, but on the other hand, you're seeing that there is all kind of moves and mobilizations that are going on that may potentially be supported by the UN. So it seems to be another scenario where you kind of feel like both ends are kind of being played against the middle. But this eclipse in itself is saying that this is setting the stage to bring everybody's attention to what's going on at the United Nations. At the time of the eclipse, it was right on the descendant with the South Node, so it can represent certain countries contemplating or discussing or talking about stepping away from relationship with them. You also have the South Node that is conjunct Lilith, which can be exposing some of the harmful kind of relationships or politicking that goes on in regards to this organization, and Mars is directly on the Sun. Now, we will see also in this next year another eclipse that's going to be on the ascendant and a Mercury retrograde. That one will be taking place in early April. Let me show it to you. And that, I think, is also going to be bringing a lot of tension to whether or not there is about to be a fresh start. You might see, certain people who are participating that may potentially want to go their own way, and you might see a lot of action revolving around Aries-related war, which is bringing some kind of awareness to the pitfalls of this organization with Chiron being there. Is it causing more problems and doing more harm than it is doing good? I think that the eclipse next year, just generally speaking, with Saturn and Mars being in conjunction, and Mars is the ruler, does talk about a lot of what is being brought forth is secretly going on in the shadows. Like, we know that war is something that is created by wealthy older men, and we see a lot of sacrifice of younger people when we have escalation and conflicts of war. this is mirroring that. And I'm wondering if you're going to hear more revolving around, you know, drafts and the UN involvement and what they're recommending for certain countries. And if there is war, and if you have certain people who are a part of the UN, if we are breaching into territories or attacking certain areas that they shouldn't, that because of involvement in the UN, we're going to see some countries that are going to have to show up and they're going to have to respond to that. So that's my concern personally. I also think about how, you know, transit Pluto is squaring the 7th house sun. So we're seeing that currently. That's going to be playing out basically this whole next year. Very similar to the square that we're seeing for Bill Gates. It's off by a couple degrees, but we're seeing a Pluto square. And when Pluto is in Aquarius to Scorpio, it is an opening square. Okay, so we still see a lot of power going on with the Scorpio placements. There is going to be challenge of, you know, Pluto and Aquarius themes, revolution, you know, people who are getting restless, people and groups and associations, politics or politicians that are challenging also our relationship or involvement with the UN as well. And so that's kind of pushing out or exposing like the hidden nature of the sun in Scorpio. We also see that, you know, there will be in the progressed chart especially, let me show you guys that. In the progressions, progressed sun opposing Saturn. So this can also indicate right here, right there. And this will be over the next year. And it's getting highlighted now because the moon is in Aries. So the moon's going to hit 21 degrees of Aries in this next month. And it's going to create a grand cardinal cross. But the sun over the next year in Capricorn, which represents responsibility, authority, public recognition, is starting to oppose Saturn. So we're going to see some countries, right, because this is usually in the 4th house, say, this isn't helping us, this is hindering us, or we're having more issues with displacement, or more issues with homelessness, or more attacks on the homeland. And now Mars and Saturn are retrograde and they're in conjunction to one another. So it's not just going to be the sun opposed Saturn where, you know, certain leaders might say we want out financially, we don't want to be a part of this. But as the sun starts approaching Mars, I also think that you're going to see some movement to be like, no, we no longer want to allow there to be so much influence revolving around the United Nations. So the next couple of years with this opposition between Saturn and Mars is definitely going to be something. It'll also continue to square Jupiter. And I think really what it's going to come down to is allowing or letting countries to govern themselves, not feeling like they have to necessarily be abiding by that. I'm not saying that there can't be councils for peace or there cannot be potentially ways of being able to rework this, but the way that it stands right now, it seems as if it may be doing more harm than it's doing good. And the eclipses in the 10th house also in the spring will be taking place, squaring all of this stuff and bringing more of this to our attention. That early April eclipse is going to be bringing up some pretty significant squares. So it'll be here. This will be the eclipse at 19 degrees. And it will oppose and square. So it's so interesting to see this reoccurring theme, right? The progressions of the United Nations, you know, that moon being in Aries, the North Node is there. Klaus Schwab being a Sun and Saturn in Aries, and, you know, the North Node is there. Bill Gates, moon in Aries, and seeing the eclipses, the North Node is there. What are we going to start seeing? Them acting like, hey, we have to take action. You know, we're leaders. This is what we go. We have to fight. There's going to be a different energy that's going to come through a lot of these groups. And I do feel like it is tapping into that collective energy of the North Node in Aries, which is getting people to be more agitated or reactionary or frustrated. And that 8 or 9 degrees, at least for Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab, kept coming up. So it led me to thinking, like, what is that Sabian symbol? Like, what does that mean? Actually, there's two here that I wanted to talk to you guys about. But the degree for Klaus Schwab's moon. No, his sun Saturn, and it was conjunct Bill Gates's moon. So there was that, and there was one other thing I wanted to show you guys. Okay. So it would be 9 degrees of Aries. So let me pull this up. We'll put Schwab here. Okay. So this is Aries 9, a crystal gazer. The theme is divination. The symbol speaks to a global perspective and the capacity to quickly grasp the significance of all the facets of a situation at once and understand the meaning of coincidental events. The image of a crystal gazer emphasizes the world of potential as it is perceived through the clairvoyance or vision. Implicit in this symbol is the concept of dual imagery and mirroring effect of when man and his universe reflect each other, thereby create means of predicting the future. On a practical level, the degree symbolizes a situation where all ordinary means for solving problems have been exhausted and divinatory techniques are turned to. At its highest, the symbol represents psychic sensitivity, insight, and the ability to organize and plan in such a manner that facilitation and convenience precede actual need. Watch for snooping, prying, or foolishly acting impractically. The accent is on sensitivity and the need to find information to immediate answers to problems. Logic and reason may not work well at this time. Solutions are discovered intuitively through psychic means. You're especially alert today, and it may surprise yourself if someone else is tuning in to something that was being kept a secret. Your greatest advantage lies in looking ahead to what's going to be needed in the not-so-distant future. Guard against being intrusive, violating others' rights to privacy. Mind your own business, and unless you're specifically asked to get involved. Stepping stones are intuition, clairvoyance, vision, reflection, sensitivity, global perspective, or potential. Well, I'd like to think that I'm the psychic that's cracking the code to why it is these individuals seem to think that they can predict the future and that they're aware of some of these world events that are going to be taking place. And you guys have to keep in mind that when you're presented with some of these created issues, these almost like farmed crises, they will step in and they will provide the solutions. Okay, that's essentially what you're going to start seeing happening. And with that, I want to close with one other thing. This is the other Sabian symbol that I noted that I forgot to talk to you guys about with Bill Gates's chart. But this Sabian symbol for that fixed star, where Uranus is going to oppose, where the new moon is going to be, right? This is Scorpio 21, because we got 20 and 21. So I'm going to read to you guys 21. A soldier directly in duty. The keyword is deviation. Termination is cooperation. The symbol speaks to living with the consequences of decisions, and in particular, the consequences of impulsiveness, the failure to think things through before acting. The image of a soldier derelict in his duty is one of the reverse symbols, and it dramatizes the dilemma faced by the individual who makes a commitment in the hope of achieving some personal goal and discovers that it's too late, that he has made a mistake. Instead of fulfilling his dream and living in a nightmare or instead of fulfilling his dream, he is living in a nightmare or compromising his own integrity. The implication here is that a man basically moves towards his highest good and will not continue for long in any direction that frustrates him or fails to bring him happiness. At its highest, it represents the ability to find cooperative means for resolving problems and a willingness to accept responsibility for mistakes. Watch for irresponsibility and selfishness. The accent is on negligence. You may find yourself dealing with repercussions of someone failing to do what they promised to do. Your greatest advantage lies in resigning responsibility from any situation or position that holds promise or potential. Tie up loose ends before you leave. Guard against letting yourself get carried away by emotion or desire in the middle of an important job. The consequences could be greater than what you're prepared to face. Stepping stones are delinquency, carelessness, omission, oversight, disregard, failure, inefficiency, inattention, incompetence, indifference, thoughtlessness, wrongdoing, negligence. Well, guys, I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know your comments. I'd love to hear your guys' hot takes on some of these monsters that are really, I think, hiding in plain sight.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I always appreciate your feedback. And thanks for listening to a little bit more of an off-the-wall video today, and letting me test drive this format for potentially creating a series on astrology, mythology, and monsters. Give me your guys' insights on this. What do you think? Was it interesting? Do you think it's crazy? But like I said, in light of the Halloween spirit, I wanted to put something out super spooky. I'll be back here doing readings tomorrow for the eclipse, so make sure you check out my community tab. You can click that tab, go and sign up for my donation readings that I'll be doing tomorrow night, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. And going into the eclipse, I hope it's a good one for you guys. I hope you guys enjoy it and it's extra positive for all of you. Until next time, I'll see you guys back here very soon. Take care.